This is okay. So at this is probably my least favorite thing to do is to quiet people down from learning, but it's time to hear the shir. We had this chus over Shabbos to hear from Rabbi Zimmerman multiple times and enjoy every minute of it from Rabbi Zimmerman's tremendous breadth of knowledge and ni'imus and clarity in giving it over to us. So today, we are going to hear a shir on the topic that we've been learning. And in Mitzvah Shem, as we said, this is going to be another shir similar to this next week. And I think that Zimmerman is also speaking on this topic, as Rabbi mentioned, on part 2 on Thursday night as well. So as we mentioned, the shir is Lila Nishvas Peretz Ben Alter Eliezer, as we mentioned earlier. And again, thank you all for coming. And we will love to hear from Rabbi Zimmerman at this time.
Bereshus Rashi HaKollel, Chavrei HaKollel, Loimdei in the Kollel. Now Chazal tell us, Asei Teirasecha Kva Umalachtecha Aroi. Your Torah should be your primary occupation, and your work should be your secondary occupation. What does that mean? And the Rambam says, very, very simply, you have 12 hours extra in a day, because you have to sleep 8 hours, you have to daven, you have to eat. You have 12 hours in a day, and therefore you should work for 3 hours, and you should learn for 9 hours a day. And then your teirascha will be kva. However, in the modern era, you have a challenge. There aren't any jobs available that can support a family for 3 hours a day. As a matter of fact, if you know of one, let me know first. And as such, today we explain this by our state of mind. It might be the other way. We spend most of our time working, less time learning, but what does one consider one's primary occupation and accomplishment? Is it the Torah or is it the work? And we have to consider our Torah our primary occupation. But since it's just in the mind, how do you know if it's truly so that Torah is my primary occupation? Or I'm just fooling myself. I'm deceiving myself by thinking it's so, but it's not really so. I believe the answer is very simple. What do you do on a day off? When you have a day off, how do you spend that day off? Of course, everyone needs to relax, everyone needs to rest, everyone needs to spend time with their family. But do they dedicate extra time to learning on that day? If they do, then a person is showing that within their hearts, this is their primary occupation. This is what they'd really like to do. Just they're busy the rest of the time. If they don't, then it's not so. And therefore, when people gather together on a morning like this, and they spend a few hours in the Kollel, it's not merely the few hours that you're spending this morning. It's a statement about the entirety of your life. What is of paramount importance to you? Today's topic is confidentiality, the halachic and legal guidelines. And the Chafetz Chaim discusses confidentiality in 3 places. Number 1, look at page 7. He writes, this is in Lashon Hara Klal Tes Eisvav, Ha'omer lechaverei eze davar. You tell a friend something. Osoloi lesaper achakach la'acherem. You mustn't repeat it to someone else. Elam kein nosan le'rishus hazeh. Unless you have permission to repeat it. So you need permission to repeat something. That's one place. Now turn to page 8. He says, V'chayev odom lahastir hasaid. Person is obligated to keep confidential a secret. If something was said in confidentiality. Even though there isn't any harm, nevertheless you have to keep it a secret. The third place the Chafetz Chaim discusses it, look at page 6. Im echad gila chaverei ba'apetlasa inyan iskay mischarei k'yoytru zeh dvar masha bestama asar achakach legales acher. You mustn't repeat something that's private about business. Pen yuchel agia alazay hezek aitzar, because it will cause him harm or pain. There are 3 places the Chafetz Chaim says that you're not allowed to repeat something. These are 3 different halachas, as he writes himself in Ber Mayim Chaim. The first halacha, first in the order that we said them today, is a Gemara in Yuma, Daf Dalet Amud Beis, which is found on page 3. It says, Vayikra el Moshe vayedaber. There are a few lessons we learn from it. And finally, it says, Omer Rabba, Menayin lo'omer davar lechaver shehu bal yomer. How do you know if I tell something to someone, you must not repeat it? Ad she'yomer lecha emor. Until the person says you have permission to repeat it. She'nema v'yedaba Hashem elov ma'oil moyed leimar. What's the word leimar? Hashem said, I'm telling it to you, and you may repeat it. Must be that if you don't get permission to repeat it, you're not allowed to repeat it. Now what did Hashem tell Moshe Rabbeinu? He taught him Torah. But nevertheless, you have no permission to repeat something unless you have unless there's explicit permission. The second Chafetz Chaim that we learned, which was on page 8, is based on a Gemara in Sanhedrin, which is found on page 4. Tana Rabbana, Menayin l'kishayetze, when you leave a bezin, lo yomer, a Dayan is not allowed to say, Hareini mezakeh v'chaveri mechayvim. I really voted in your favor. It was the other Dayanim who ruled against you. Aval ma eseh shechaveri rabbalai, but I was outvoted 2-1. Talmud loy meloi seilach rachel ba'mecha. That is the source, the Chafetz Chaim says himself, on the second one that we learned, which was on page 8. The first one that says don't repeat something, the last thing that we learned, which is but the first in the Chafetz Chaim on page 6, which we learned that don't repeat something that will cause someone damage, is found on page 1, Pasuk and Chumash. Loiseilach rachel ba'mecha. And the Chafetz Chaim explains as follows. The first halacha, which is, don't repeat something unless you have permission, that is a midah tova. It's a correct code of conduct. It's not a din, it's a midah tova. The second din, don't repeat something which is told to you as a secret, which is based on the Gemara in Sanhedrin, that is a derabanan. Pasuk says, Hailach Rachel Megalasait. The third thing we learned, which is don't repeat something that causes someone damage, that is a deraisa of Leiseilach Rachel Bamecha. The first thing is about any piece of information. The second thing is about a private piece of information. The third thing is about a piece of information which will cause harm or damage to someone else. So the Chofetz Chaim has three categories. Things that it's not proper to repeat, things that you're not allowed to repeat midrabanan, things you're not allowed to repeat midaraisa. If you look in the Poskim and you look in the Marshal, he really says there are four categories. Because the first category, do not repeat something, if you don't have permission, can be divided into two also. There are certain things that people tell you. You meet someone on the street, they tell you a piece of information. It's not private, nor was the context that it was told to you private. Then you have something else. You have information which is not private. However, the context in which it's told to you, someone calls you into his office, locks the door and tells it to you. So although the information is rather mundane, but there's an expectation of privacy. The Marshal says the Gemara that says, Menayin, if someone tells you something, you shouldn't repeat it. Tuhu bibal yoymar, which sounds like an isser, not just a midah teva. He's referring to the second thing. Why? Hashem called Moshe Rabbeinu into the Oil Mayid. Why did he call him to the Oil Mayid? Because he spoke to him in the middle of the street. Well, if he called him into the Oil Mayid, then you need a lemar. But if Hashem would have told it to him on the street, then there wouldn't be an Isser Bal Yomer. So what is there? Yes, someone tells you information. So there's a Meiri that says that if someone tells you something, you shouldn't repeat it without permission, albeit it's not private, nor is there a context of an expectation of confidentiality. The pasuk says, "Hoylech Rachel Megala Sait." What's the end of that pasuk? V'nemon ruach mechasa davar. A person who has a loyal spirit, a person who's discreet, remains discreet. And therefore, as such, there's really four madregas. There's a midah of discretion. Someone tells you something, don't repeat it. It's not an isser. That's what we call nemon ruach mechasa davar. Then there's something, someone tells you something which is not private, but it was said in a context which there's an expectation of not repeating it. That is the Gemara in Yuma, Bal Taimar. Then there's something which is a secret. It is private. It doesn't cause harm if anyone knows about it, but people want to keep their own personal business private. That's the Gemara in Sanhedrin, Hoylech Rachel Megala Sait. Finally, there's when someone tells you something which would cause the person harm. If you repeat it, that's the Issa Derais of Leselech Rachel Ba'amecha. Now it's interesting to note when you look at the Gemara in Sanhedrin, it says a Dayan Zal repeats something, Shenema Leselech Rachel Ba'amecha, which is a pasuk in Chumash, Va'oima Hoylech Rachel Megala Sait, which is a pasuk in Mishli. The answer is, when a Dayan repeats something, sometimes it can cause a person harm. If there's a financial dispute, or there's a dispute about some invention or whatever, sometimes it's just unpleasant that your personal details get revealed. And that's why the Gemara says, you're not allowed to do it, and then he says, even if it doesn't cause any harm, so the person's not a Rachel, but nevertheless it says, Hoylech Rachel Megala Sait. This thing of the Is of Gili Side in Chuvas Maya, it says it's not only verbally, it could be written in written form also. It doesn't say the word of Dibur. The Gemara in Sanhedrin says that there was a certain Talmud who was told something privately, and 22 years later he repeated it, and they called him in the Beis Medrash Galya Raza. He's a revealer of secrets. He's not a discreet person. And what you see is there's no statute of limitations on keeping secrets. So we defined four categories. Someone tells you something. No, it's not private. It wasn't said in the context of privacy. Nevertheless, there is a midah of Neman Ruach Mechasa Davar. Someone tells you something which is not private, but it's said in a context where it looks like there's an expectation of privacy. There, that's the Isser Bal Taimar, to repeat it without express permission. Next is if you know something which is private and the information itself, the person doesn't want it revealed, but it doesn't cause him any harm, that's Hailach Rachel Megala Said. It's a Drabanan. And finally, if you repeat information which causes someone harm, that's an Issa Deraisa of Leiselach Rachel Pamecha. What about revealing your own secrets? A lot of things that people would rather kept private, but it's my secret. It's mine. I could say it. If you look in the Sefer Pele Yayetz, so Musa Sefer, which has Pele Yayetz, good eitzes, he says, Lo yegala afilu soidis atzmai l'achar. Do not repeat your own secrets to someone. Shenemar neman ruach machasadavar. He says, neman ruach machasadavar, you should be neman to yourself, not just to other people. Furthermore, it says, Vesatznuim chachma. Furthermore, he writes, Al tegala oyavecho mash'ata mechasa meseinecha. Don't tell your friends what you don't want your enemies to know. He says, Yaakov Avinu spoke to Leah and Rachel out in the field. Never talk secrets in the house. You never know who's overhearing you. And therefore, he says, the midah of discretion is not only a bein adam lechaverei, but you should know it's a bein adam la'atzmai. A discreet person doesn't disclose things unnecessarily. Now, let's go further. Eavesdropping. Want to listen to someone's conversation. Whether in the old-fashioned sense, it's called eavesdropping because there used to be eaves on houses. In England, you still have them. And you can stand under the eave and listen to someone else's conversation. Today, you can do it electronically a lot easier. Now, it's a very not nice thing to do. But is it an isser to eavesdrop to someone's conversation? And the poskim talk about it, and they say 4 possible sources that it's usser min adin to do so. In Tshuvas Chikkei Leiv, he says, "V'hafta l'reacha kamecha." You don't like it when people listen to your conversations. You shouldn't listen to other people's conversations. In the Sefer Halachas Ktanis, Tshuvas Halachas Ktanis, he says, we learn it out from Leiselach Rachel Bamecha. Leiselach Rachel means don't go around like a gossip. He says there's no different being a gossip or comporting yourself like a gossip, whether you're trying to get gossip or you're revealing gossip. It's a Leiselach Rachel Bamecha. The third category, which we have to know if such a category exists, is Hezek Shmiya. When you learn Baba Basra, you know there's something called Hezek Riya, and you have to put up a fence between neighbors, a wall. Good walls makes good neighbors. What about Shmiya? Even if I put up a wall, but I can listen to the conversations going in my neighbor's side of the yard. So the Meiri says, because Shmiya people could be nizar from. They'll talk quietly, they'll talk softly, they'll write things down. That's why Chazal only discuss a Hezek Riya, not Hezek Shmiya, because Hezek Shmiya, albeit it's usser, but you can protect yourself from. The Ramban in Bava Basra Daf Nuntes says that what's wrong with Hezek Riya, or what's the damage? He says 1, ayin hara, 2, lishna bisha, 3, tznius. The last 2 apply to Hezek Shmiya. However, in Tshuvas Ra'im, Siman Ches, he says that there's no such thing as Hezek Shmiya, and that's why it only says to put a wall, not a soundproof wall. So we have a machlekes in the Poskim. Is there such a thing as Hezek Shmiya? According to those that there is something called Hezek Shmiya, eavesdropping constitutes Hezek Shmiya. In Tshuvas Chikkei Leiv, he says it's usher because of Genevas Das. So therefore, eavesdropping has 4 potential isurim. After Yacha Kamecha, Leiselach Rachel Bamecha, Hezek Shmiya, and Genevas Das. What's the difference between them?
if you're sitting in Smedish after Bayrav and some guy 2 tables behind you is having a very private conversation and he for some reason thinks that you can't hear so well, are you mechuyev to leave?
Okay, we'll discuss that. But what is the difference between the reasons? Can you eavesdrop on a conversation of a nachri? There's no v'hafta re'acha kamoicha or le'seilach rachel ba'amecha on a guy, only on a yid. But the issa of hezik and the issa of gnevis das applies to a guy. Don't see why not. If you're not be mazik, so you have to be to achakas and zaken also. Next, Cherem de Rabbeinu Gershom. Came along Rabbeinu Gershom and said, do not read letters that one person sent another person. Why not? The answer is all the reasons we explained on eavesdropping. Chuvas Teres Chaim says it's also when you... That's what we're going to answer. Now,
why do you need Cherem? It's already Yisur.
2 people asked it. Now, there's another issa. When you pick up someone's letter, so the question is asked, why did Rabbeinu Gershon have to make a cherem on something which is plain usher? We know Rabbeinu Gershon shouldn't marry 2 wives. Okay. That's something that he created, invented. But why would he make a cherem on something which is plain usher? And the truth is, if you look in Chuvas Noid B'Yehuda, Even Ezer, Chelik Aleph, Siman Ayin Hey, and Ayin Zayin, Chuvas from Sefer, Even Ezer, Siman Gimel, that there are really 2 types of cherem Rabbeinu Gershons. There are certain things that Rabbeinu Gershon instituted and he invented. He came up with certain ideas for a tikkun ha'olam. Don't marry 2 wives, don't divorce bal karchach, whatever it is. There are other things that were already usher. He saw people were lax in it, and he was mechazik it with a cherem. Zok the Noid B'Yehuda in the Sam Sefer, the first type of cherem Rabbeinu Gershom, which is the ones we're most accustomed to, those are the Rabbanans. Rabbeinu Gershom made an isser. Rabbeinu Gershom, as great as he was, can't make an isser deraisa. He says the second type of cherem Rabbeinu Gershom, where something was already usher, so he was mechazik it by putting you in cherem, well, that's a deraisa of nedorim. And therefore the second type of cherem Rabbeinu Gershom is more chamer than the first type of Rabbeinu Gershom. Now, although the cherem was on everything we discussed before, however, the words of the cherem were on a letter, on something which is written. Written could be a letter. We say a letter, but if there's anything written, it could be personal documents, it could be a fax, it could be information on a computer. Eavesdropping, as bad as it is not included in Cherem Rabbeinu Gershom. Now, some people write on the outside of a letter, Pagin Chargama, Peretz Gede Yitzchenu Nachash, Cherem Rabbeinu Gershom, which means don't read it. Why do you have to write it? First of all, it happens to be usher for many reasons, and further, Rabbeinu Gershom made a cherem. So there is a Shulti Geburim in Shuas that says that if you want to activate the cherem, you have to write these words. The halachas ktanas chikei leiv say there's no such thing. He made a cherem, and that cherem goes no matter what. In the Knesset Gdoila, he says that Rabbeinu Gershom did 2 things. He made a isser and a cherem. The isser is regardless. For the cherem, you have to activate it. What happens? You walk down the street and you find a letter. This letter is open. It's thrown out, discarded. Can you pick it up and read it? So in Chuvas Meram Rottenberg, he says yes. Obviously, the recipient of the letter has no problem with you reading it because he tossed it out on the street. In Chuvas Halachas Ktanis and Chikei Leiv says, but how do you know that the sender isn't makbid? Now this is l'chayra machlekes. It's Cherem Rabbeinu Gershom. If someone receives a letter and he wants to show it to me, am I allowed to read it? According to Merame Rottenberg, yes. According to the halachas ketanis and the chikikei leiv, you're not allowed to send it, because you're not allowed to show it to someone, because the sender might be makbid. Where did they get this idea from? You'll ask everyone. The pashtus is, it's totally in the recipient, and the recipient can share information with everyone they want. Where did they get this idea that it's usher?
You see the Rebbe Shalom Lema. You gave him permission.
Okay, but that's not an isser. My Chavetz Chaim says it's a midah tayver. So they prove it from Malachim, Pasuk in Malachim. David HaMelech, as he's about to die, tells Shlomo HaMelech, "V'gam ata yadata es asher asher li Yoav ben Tzruya." You know what Yoav did to me, and make sure he doesn't have a pleasant ending. What is it that Yoav did to him? Zakt Rashi, Shehera hasefer sheshalach David biyad Uriah. David HaMelech sent a letter with Uriah to Yoav, which told Yoav, take Uriah and put him on the front. Like this, he'll die and he'll be able to marry Bathsheba. Yoav showed it to Uriah. In fact, the Kollel, the halachas ketanis, what was the avla? It was his letter. He's the recipient. The recipient is allowed to show it to someone. So they say, Vais dois, that you're not allowed to, if the sender didn't want to, and David HaMelech surely didn't want him to send it, you're not allowed to show it.
Why is that rechilas? Not rechilas.
I didn't say it's rechilas.
I'm asking what's the right.
Which isser is it? All the ones of eavesdropping. Halachas ketanis.
That implies to even saving a life.
Okay, I'm saying let's isolate this. Halachas ketanis asks the question: what if Uriah was delivering the letter to Yoav? What should he have done? He says he's not supposed to read it for the reasons behind Cherem ben Agesh. To give it back to David HaMelech, don't want to deliver it, he'll send it with another delivery person. So what should he have done? He said he should have ripped it up. Because ripping it up to protect yourself would be mutter. You just had no right to read it. Anyway, that having been said, there is a machlokes. Does Cherem de Rabbeinu Gershom apply when the recipient is happy to share it and the sender is not? Now, the most obvious contemporary application of this is pushing the forward button on an email. You get an email, and the easiest thing in the world, and people do it many times a day, it's interesting, they forward it. Why? I want to share it. The question is, did the sender want to share it also? Now, of course, if it causes damage to the sender, that's already going to be rechilas. But even if it doesn't cause any damage, is it including Cherem ben Gershom? This is this machlokes. What about you want to show it to your family? Someone sends you an email or letter, and you'd like to show it to your family. Is that also included in Cherem ben Gershom? So in the Sefer Das Kedoshim in Siman Shin Lamed Dalet, he says a very novel thought. He says the halacha is if someone gives you something to watch, you can give it to your wife and children, or your parents for that matter, to watch, because kol ha-mafkid al das ishtay abanav mafkidim. If someone sends you a letter, they know that it's going to be shown to your family. However, even this probably has a limitation depending on the contents of the letter. Will it cause damage? So to review what we've said so far, there's a concept from the Pele Yayitz of discretion. Don't repeat your own private information. There's next a midah tova of neman ruach machasa davar. Someone tells you something, don't repeat it. There's next that if a person tells you something and the context shows an expectation of privacy, you need explicit permission to repeat it. That's a Gemara in Yuma of Bal Yaimar. Next, someone tells you something, or you have knowledge of something which a person wants to remain private, albeit it causes the person no damage. That is an isser of a derabanan of Halach Rachel Magala Said, not to repeat something which would cause someone harm, that is an Issa Derais of Leseilach Rachel Amecha. Eavesdropping would include After Acha Kamecha Rechilus Gnevis Das Hezek Shmiya. Chein Rabbeinu Gershom includes all of the above. Now let's take some examples. One's own secrets, Peliyayit says, do not reveal. That's seemingly self-explanatory. The Gemara in Bava Metzia says, Talmud Chacham is muter l'shanais b'shloisha dvarim. Talmud Chacham is allowed to deceive in three things. Ba'orcha, b'mesachta, b'poria. Ba'orcha means if someone hosted you very graciously, you shouldn't repeat it, even if you're asked, because it might cause someone damage. Mesachta is, someone asks you, do you know this? That's another. When my son was 9 years old, my oldest son, it's a bit of a phenomena, and he memorized all of Bava Metzia. And I took him to my Rashiva, Shmuel Birnbaum, that's all, to take him a faher. So the first question the Rashiva asks him is, "Ihr kennt Mesachas Bava Metzia? Do you know Bava Metzia?" Son doesn't answer. He says, "Ihr kennt Bava Metzia?" Doesn't answer. So Rashiva tells him, "You came here for faher. Do you know Bava Metzia?" Doesn't answer. He tells me, "I ken Bava Metzia," because it says on Daf Chav Gimel that a Talmud Chacham muter l'shanais b'mesachta. Then you have Bepuria. Bepuria literally means matters of personal privacy, personal intimacy and privacy. There's a sefer called Titan Emes Liyaakov about when you're supposed to say the emes and when you're allowed to prevaricate. And he says, he asked Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach and Rav Elyashiv a question. Someone comes to your door and wants to speak to you. So if he's a polite person, you can send someone to say he's not available. There are some people who don't take no for an answer, and unless you explain to them what you are doing, and in their eyes it's more important than what they want, they're not going to take no for an answer. Are you mechuyev? And you are doing something important. Are you mechuyev to explain it? And he says there that both Reb Shlomo Zalman and Rav Elyashiv said you can tell the person to go to the door and say he's not home. Why? Because Talmud Chacham muter l'shanais bepuria, privacy doesn't mean pure privacy matters. Anything, you're not obligated to disclose your personal business to other people. Of course, you have to be very careful when your kid goes to don't say my father said he's not home. But nevertheless, you should know that that is mutter. Tell you a story when I moved to Gateshead. So the second day I was there, I was quite jet lagged. And sure enough, Rabbi Falk came to visit, and I was sleeping. So he knocked on the door, my wife opened up, and said he wants to visit the Rav, and my wife said he's napping. So he told her, you don't ever say the Rav is napping, you say that he's preparing a share. So my wife said, but he's not preparing a share. She said, first of all, how does your husband prepare the share? He's rested. The information's in his head. No, you have to be rested to put it together. That's how he prepares shura. So first of all, it's not a lie. Second of all, you're not mechuyev to go tell people what your husband is doing. Thought at that time it was interesting. Later in Achachti Ladas, it says in Chuvas Melamed Lahoil, Shetziva le'ishtay, whenever he went to take a rest, he told his wife, tell everyone I'm preparing a share. Pshat is you're not mechuyev to disclose personal information, although it's not top secret. Next, someone tells you something, don't repeat it. That's a midah tova. Someone tells you something in a context of expectation of privacy, like Moshe Rabbeinu, that's an issa bal taimer. Someone tells you something private, give an example, someone tells you about a shidduch. You know, my son is going out with so-and-so and it looks serious. The next person comes and says, tell me, you know what's doing by so-and-so thing? Is his son going out? Is the shidduch serious? In the Sefer Titan Emes L'Yaakov, it says, both Reb Shlomo Zalman and Rav Yashiv said you could say Eini Yedeya. Because, like you say, Bepuria means people are allowed to maintain privacy. This halacha that a Dvar Seiser, even though it doesn't cause harm, which is based on the Gemara in Sanhedrin, the Gemara in Sanhedrin says it about a Bezdin. Because Masechta Sanhedrin is talking about a Bezdin. The Pasuk in Mishli has nothing to do with a Bezdin. Hoylech Rachel Megala Said is about an expectation of privacy. In Tshuvas Marnach, it says this is true not only about a Dayan, but anyone who's appointed by the Tzibur to deal with Tzarchei Tzibur, there's an expectation of privacy, and he has an issur to repeat what went on. In a board meeting of a shul, you're not allowed to repeat it. In Tshuvas Marnach in Kuf Yud Aleph says, V'ha'oisa came. Someone's a mamuna ala tzibur, and he repeats what happened. Posuli manus metuvei. He's disqualified from serving the community. Rabbi Englander asks, what happens in your shul and you overhear people talking? What should you do? You should know. The Sefer Chassidim already discussed it. Sefer Chassidim says if they're talking something private in Beis Medrash and you're overhearing it, Yelech lebeisav yispalel levad. You should go home and daven b'yechidus, even if you miss a minyan. Obviously, they were talking even in the middle of davening, or it could be they were having a meeting in the ladies' shul, and you're davening in the men's shul, but you happen to overhear. Zok Sefer Chassidim, go home.
Mordechai able to listen to Big Son and Sarah.
So we might address it, but they were goyim at least, so there was no vav terach kamecha and leiselach rachel b'mecha.
There's no vav in klasa on secret?
No. Now that was the Chavetz Chaim we read on page 6. What about this te'elis? We know in Hilchos Lashon Hara, you're allowed to say Lashon Hara when it's a te'elis for someone. Are you allowed to repeat secrets l'te'elis? And Ibn Nissen Karelitz writes in Chut Hashani that he once did a din Torah on a divorce case. And then one of the people, someone asked about shidduch information about one of the people, one of the litigants in the din Torah, and it so happened to be that this is the person who was totally blameless. And therefore, he was thinking, can I repeat? Although there's an expectation of privacy in Bezdin, but here it's mamash l'te'elis. Of course, he could ask permission, but is this l'te'elis mutter? So he went to ask his uncle, the Chazon Ish. And the Chazon Ish said that te'elis is a heta in Lashon Hara, but not in Gili Said, because you still were Megala Said. Ad kan hasipur. And he says he wonders, what's the difference? I believe the answer is very pashut, and it's included in the words of the Chazon Ish. The reason why Lashon Hara is mutter l'te'elis is because it's not Lashon Hara anymore. Lashon Hara is negative talk, harmful talk, and when there is a te'elis, it's not harmful anymore. It's not Lashon Hara, it's Lashon Tov. As a matter of fact, the Chavetz Chaim writes in Hagah, in Hilchos Lashon Hara, Klal Yud, Halacha Yudalad in the Hagah, that if a person has a need to vent, normally we say te'elis, I tell Lashon Hara te'elis because the Shemeya needs to know about it. What happens if I have absolutely no interest in it, and the person wants to vent to me and he has a need to talk? Shteit in Chavetz Chaim that that's also called te'elis. Te'elis doesn't have to be for the Shemeya, the te'elis can be for the Medaber. He says, how do I know such a thing? It's the Pasuk. The Agabalavish, Yasichena. I have a worry. Talk to someone else. You think someone really cares about my worry? It's just healthy to talk. And therefore it's a te'elis.
But what if that mazik's the person that they're talking about?
No, that we're not talking about. Just too much off the topic for the moment. But it's called the te'elis. Rechilus, if it's a te'elis, it's still rechilus. Gili soy, that's what the Chazon Ish said. That even if it's te'elis, it's still gili soid. You're not taking away the fact that you're being megala aside, and there's no such. It's not a asay deichalois asay in te'elis. that Te'elis overrides anything. It's just Te'elis makes it Ois Lashon Hara. When it comes to Rechilas, and here we're only talking about the Rabbanon Rechilas, because in the Bezdin, nevertheless, it doesn't override. Now you have a question. I have personal information, and it was told to me with a expectation of privacy, and revealing it will cause actual harm to the person. That's an Issa Derais of Leiseilach Rachel Bamecha. However, if I don't reveal it, I'm causing harm to someone else. Am I allowed to reveal it? Let's give some examples. You're a doctor, and you know that a person has a serious illness, and he's meeting someone for shidduchim, and he's not repeating it. Are you allowed to repeat it? Talking about the halacha first. You're a doctor, and you know a person is losing their eyesight, and they're still driving, They have a contagious disease, and they're walking around. You're causing spiritual harm to other people. But I know this as a secret, told in a context of a secret, which is private, which will cause someone else harm. What am I supposed to do? Give a look at page 1. Page 1 it says, Loiseilach Rachel Ba'amecha. Then the end of the pasuk is Loisamoid al dam recha. What?
I would just for my chazis.
Well, my chazis tells me to do nothing.
Don't do it.
Oh. So, Loisamoid al dam recha. Loisamoid al dam recha is you have to prevent people from harm, from drowning, from even financial loss. Why are these two in the same pasuk? Generally in Chumash, things go together. These are two separate Isurim. There's one, don't be a gossip, and number 2, if someone's drowning, save them. Zakt Netziv in Hamik David, I think it's in page 2, at the end. V'oid nichlal besmichas azaras helu, she'af al gaf, she'uzharta leiseilach rachel, even though you were commanded leiseilach rachel, v'chal mokam leisamed al dam re'echa. The Torah qualifies leiseilach rachel b'amecha with leisamed al dam re'echa, that if you know that someone's going to harm someone else, you're mechuyev to do it. V'osalamed al dam re'echa. The smichas of the Torah is to teach you that leiseilach rachel b'amecha has an override called leisamed al dam re'echa. That's how the Tziv learns Chumash. If you look in the Pischei Tshuva on Orachaim Kuf Nun Vav, it's a separate sefer, this Pischei Tshuva, and he says as follows: Kol ha'olam mar'ishim al leiseilach rachel. The whole world screams about leiseilach rachel, the all types of Lashon Hara campaigns and Lashon Hara chizuk. V'ani marish al leisamed al dam re'echa. I would like to scream a bit about people who don't reveal information. Shlomo Kluger's daughter seemingly fell in terribly in the shidduch, and he wrote a whole sefer about the rishis of the people who didn't tell him what they all knew when they knew that his daughter was going out. So what we see is that when there's a leisamed al dam re'echa, this overrides leiseilach rachel ba'amecha. Not only does it override, but you're mechuyev to do so. The question is, if you look in Shari Tshuva Rabbeinu Yoina Klal Gimel Reish Chaf Aleph, it says you're allowed to repeat it because leisamed al dam re'echa. So Shlomo Zalman asks, what do you mean you're allowed to repeat it? You have to repeat it. So in Truth Tzitz Eliezer says, Rabbeinu has to tell you you're allowed to repeat it. Once you're allowed to, then you're mechuyev to. That's obvious. The question is, who said that you're allowed to in the first place?
The rough example is the Kollel sound should be on both ways.
What do you mean?
If I tell people that I'm going to harm the doctor.
We're talking the doctor has the shayla. The doctor knows that someone is legally blind and he's driving. So if he repeats it, the guy is going to go to jail. And if he doesn't repeat it, then this person is going to knock over people. So that is leisamed al dam re'echa.
In the case of the shidduch example, he could lose his license for revealing that information. So
We know that. We'll discuss the conflicts, but first we're teaching halacha. And as a matter of fact, just on the topic of shidduchim itself, which is a topic on its own, we're going to have a shir here in the Kollel Thursday night at 9:15, which information should be disclosed and which one not. But halachically, you're mechuyev to disclose it. Of course, one needs to exercise judgment. When is it leiseilach rachel ba'amecha, and when is it leisamed al dam re'echa? But nevertheless, you should know there is a tension between the two. Here's another question. If you're a doctor, there's something called the Hippocratic Oath, which you swear, or used to do it at least, to swear to confidentiality. So l'chaira, dal mahacha, l'seilach rachel b'amecha, if you're going to repeat information that protects people, you're going to be over shuas sheker. And the answer might be, give a look in page 5. The Ramah says, Yesh oimim da nishba shaloi legalis l'chaveiroi davar sheyatzilenu min ha'hefsid having nishba levatel mitzvah ve'enai chal. You can't swear to not to repeat things which cause damage. That's a shvua against the Torah. And therefore, the shvua is not chal. Rav Yashiv says it's not so pashut because here you made the shvua before you got the information. Furthermore, it's a kollel because you kollel all information with this specific information. So he says you should do hataras nadarim. Tzitz Eliezer says, I never meant it in Azar Oifen.
Isn't the understanding of the shvuah for the future though?
What?
Isn't the understanding of that shvuah for the future? So how can it be that at the time it was going on the past?
It wasn't going on the past. I didn't say it's going on the past.
So what was Rabbi
Rav Yashiv was saying that the case of the Ramah is that when I swore, I knew it was information that will harm people. As opposed to here, when I swore, I meant it for the future.
When a doctor has a responsibility to report something about his patient,
Right.
a legal situation,
Right.
the person that went to the doctor knew beforehand that he's going to say it.
He's
They
going to
asked
say,
him.
okay. So, like this. First, we wanted to establish that the Samad Amre'echa overrides L'Seilach Rachel B'Amecha. Now, I just want to point out something. If you're going to become a doctor, or a therapist, or the like, there are civil laws of maintaining confidentiality, unless there's harm, and there are halachic laws. It so happens to be that the definition of harm in halacha and the definition of harm in civil law are two totally different things. In civil law, it means suicide or homicide. In halacha, it can mean any damage, a shidduch. There's no such thing in civil law that you can reveal something confidential because of a shidduch. Or even financial loss, the Rambam in Sefer Mitzvah says, is leisamed al adam re'echa. What happens if it's spiritual harm? One person is causing someone else spiritual harm. It was told to you in privacy. In halacha, you're allowed to repeat it. In civil law, you're not allowed to. As a matter of fact, there's a famous lawsuit in New York State where a woman revealed to two rabbanim that she doesn't keep taras hamishpacha. And they went and told her husband, and she went and sued them for violating the clergyman penitent confidentiality rule. Now the judge must have been Jewish because his ruling was, one, that she told it to two rabbanim at the same time, not one, so there's no expectation of confidentiality. But the second one was a chiddush. He said that the client, the priest, penitent confidentiality is to prevent the priest from being compelled to testify in court against his client, but there is no law expectation between the client and the priest. Like they must have been a yid to come up with such a chiddush in such a matter which is totally ruchnius and not physical harm. So I don't try it in Florida, or maybe you could, but don't try it in Washington D.C. at least, because you're not going to win a case on that. But you have to know that when you get into a situation such as this, and any of the professions helping people, you're going to have a conflict between the two. And think about it in advance, what you're going to do. Some people will deal with from people, sign a contract with them that anything that I'm halachically obligated to reveal as decided by so-and-so, I'm going to reveal. Then you don't have an expectation. Sometimes you can't do that. But, as they say, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. You're going to find yourself in a lot of hot water, because al pi Torah you're going to have to do one thing, and by civil law or based on your licensing board, you might have to do something else, and you're going to get yourself in a lot of trouble, and you're going to need a lot of ingenuity to get yourself out of it. The Chazon Ish told them this in Karelitz: when people ask you anything, before you say anything, you should say, I'm a Dayan and I don't talk about people. I can't reveal anything. The Sod Miktsai. It's a professional secret. That was his advice. And you should know, if you treat people, you get into, first of all, generally, if you treat people, you shouldn't even acknowledge that you have a patient, or that person's your patient. More so, you get yourself in a lot of trouble that when you give information about someone, you give information about someone when it's positive, but when it's negative, you say, well, I'm not allowed to talk. Besides, that itself is negative, and that itself is Lashon Hara. The only thing to do is, if you're in one of the professions which have an expectation of confidentiality, you have to say in advance, I'm a doctor, I don't give shidduch information. Is that person a patient of yours? No, I just don't, because that's the only way to fulfill it. Very briefly, because it's getting late, what about, you want to protect a secret, which you told someone. So in civil law, you sign an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement. Are these agreements valid in halacha? So one, you have a disclosure contract. He obligates themselves not to disclose. The contract in halacha won't be valid because this is called a kinyan dvarim. A kinyan can only work on effectuating a transaction. You can't have a kinyan to do something. What about a hischayvus? A hischayvus with a shibur aguf can work on a kinyan, on something which is a kinyan dvarim. I could be mischay myself to give you a present with a shibut. So will this work? I'll mischay myself with a shibut not to disclose. The answer is machlokes Nesivos HaMishpat and Divrei Chaim. Can there be a hischayvus on a negative, on not doing something? You can have a hischayvus to do something. Can you have a hischayvus not to do something? So the next thing is to make a hischayvus with a knas. I won't disclose it, and if I do disclose it, I'm going to pay you X. There you have a kinyan on mammon. You still have a problem of asmachta loikanya. If you write ma'achshav, if I disclose it, I will hereby pay you X, Y, Z, and I'm mechuyev from now. According to the mechaber, you took away the problem of asmachta. According to the Ramah, even if you said ma'achshav, and even if it's biyadcha, if the penalty is exaggerated, that's also called an asmachta. As the Ramah says, if you say im oiver b'loy avid, if a worker says, if I won't work, ashalom b'meitav works, ashalom elav zuz, it doesn't work according to Ramah. So how would you make a non-disclosure agreement that should be valid in halacha? And the only answer is the same way you'd make a shtar for Yerushas Habanis. The person will make a hischayvus, I hereby obligate myself, me'achshav u'bebez nechashav, right now, for a penalty, and that penalty could be whatever it is, $10 million, on the t'nai, but if I don't disclose it, you're meichel l'chayv. That is the only way that it will be halachically valid. This is also true about non-compete clauses. Non-compete clauses, at least in England, don't usually stand up even in a civil court because they're not fair, and there's something called the fairness doctrine. But even if it would stand up in civil court, it's not going to stand up in the bezdin. The only way it will stand up in the bezdin, if it's a chayvus ma'achshav, an unconditional, a debt which is chayvus from now, based on a condition which the non-disclosure is the t'nai. This is the only way to do it halachically. This is a basic outline of the laws of confidentiality in halacha. Just maybe end with a Faragada, I heard before of Elbaum talking about why was the Churban Shalai Birchu B'Torah Tchila. And he asked, because they didn't say Birch Satera, it's only an Asay. That's why you have a Churban? And he gave a beautiful answer. There's a more fundamental question. Who learns without making a Birchas HaTorah? I know many people make Birchas HaTorah and don't learn. My whole life I've never met anyone who learns without Birchas HaTorah. Now we know the Ran brings a Teretz Rabbeinu Yaina, and some Sefer says in there, but I've never met anyone with who doesn't say Birchas HaTorah, learns without Birchas HaTorah. The truth is, it's if you're Medayik in the Gemara says, Shlai Birchu B'Torah Tchila. It sounds like they did make Birchas HaTorah. They just didn't say it before they started learning. They said it in the middle of learning. That's even more perplexing. Because who learns and makes Birchas HaTorah but doesn't make it before you learn? What's the problem in the Gemara? The Gemara earlier says, why is it that Talmidei Chachamim who have children are not Talmidei Chachamim? Shloi baruchu b'Torah tchila. Shein mevarachim b'Torah tchila? Even more perplexing. We're talking about people that the Gemara calls Talmidei Chachamim. So I want to relate to you a thought. There are two types of brachas: Birchas HaMitzvahs and Birchas HaNehenen. Birchas HaMitzvahs are said before you do the mitzvah, because Kol HaBrachas mevarachim aleim over l'asiyasam. What happens if in the middle of the mitzvah you can make a bracha also? Over l'asiyasam is just l'chatchila. According to Raman HaShchiti, you can even make a bracha afterwards. Birchas HaNehenen you have to make beforehand, because asur lahanas ma'olam hazeh b'loi bracha. What is our learning? Our Birchas HaTorah, of course everyone makes Birchas HaTorah, but is our Birchas HaTorah a Birchas HaMitzvahs, or is it a Birchas HaNehenen? Nafkamina is, can you make it in the middle of learning? That Chazal. If a person learns, when he's a Talmud Chacham, aber sein Bracha is a Birchas HaMitzvahs, you can't transmit it to the next generation. It's a sense of obligation, it's a burden, you can't give it over to other people. Only if it's a Birchas HaNehenen that you have to say in advance, that's when you can transmit it. Alma of the Haaretz. After the Churban Beis Rishon, no one understood why. What happened? Shalal Neviim v'loi Pershua, Shalal L'Zakenim v'loi Pershua, Shalal L'Bachsas v'Malachi Ashoris v'loi Pershua. No one was able to discern what was the sin. They were perfect. Once heard of Shach, was on the beach of Netanya, 1983. So he said, if the Malachim and the Zakenim and the Nevi'im don't know, so what do you expect from people? And Rav Shach said, Weißt du, is a Mensch darf sich kennen besser wie a Navi. To understand someone else, you have to be a Navi. To understand yourself, you should know what's going on by you. And they didn't understand. It was so subtle. And Avada they learned, and Avada they made Birchas HaTorah. And therefore, Alma of the Aretz. So the Eibishter said, Al Ozvam es Tairasi, that you have forsaken my Torah. What does it mean, forsaken Torah? Shaloi Birchu b'Torah Tchila, Avada they learned, and Avada they said Birchas HaTorah. But their Birchas HaTorah was a Birchas HaMitzvahs. It wasn't a Birchas HaNehenen. And if your Torah is not a Birchas HaNehenen, that's Ozvam es Tairasi. That's called forsaking Torah. The essence of Torah, V'haravnu Hashem Elokeinu, is Divrei Sarascha Befinu. Make the Torah sweet, and then v'niyah nachnu tzeitzayinu tzeitzayam chabeis Yisrael kolanu yedish shemecha. Only then can it transmit. Only then can we merit true kedusha.